So, Catherine, thank you so much for coming. As Miles says, you're Shadow Minister for Asia and the Pacific. I actually cannot think of someone who is more appropriate for the role. As you can just about still hear, born in Australia, came to the UK over 25 years ago. An academic record which includes a Master's in Chinese Studies from SOAS. She's an excellent linguist. Is it 5 languages?
Some of them better than others.
Some of them better than others. Mandarin is one of the ones which you are really good at, having more than brushed it up when teaching English as a second language for a period in Nanjing in China. Very successful career in local government, including as leader of Islington, and entered Parliament in 2015. And the way that career switches go from a whole heap of social issues to becoming really very, very well informed in foreign affairs. At least 3 big things in there. Parliamentary Select Committee on International Trade, member of the Joint Committee on Arms Export Controls, and a member of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. So we're honoured to have you here today. Main thing we're going to talk about is the shifting geopolitical landscape and the effects on the UK financial and related professional services sector. But I suspect the conversation will move around a little bit. So should we start with sort of broad question on Labour's overall thinking around foreign policy? What are the key features? What are the guiding principles? And I'm sure you'll guide the answer towards Asia Pacific, but maybe you could start a little bit broader.
Of course. Well, it's a real delight to be here, and thank you so much for inviting me. Just checking that my mic is working. Yes? Good. So David Lammy's actually just written an essay called The Case for Progressive Realism, which I can leave at the back of the room on paper. Old-fashioned, like lots of MPs. And basically the key point that David and Keir wish to make is that the UK under a Labour administration would be sort of leaning into Europe, but within that, obviously, not ignoring the fact that the Asia-Pacific area is the area with the greatest economic growth. David Lammy is very keen to point out that relationship with Europe, the closeness. We've just announced that a Labour government would seek to have a security pact with the European Union, which is quite a good entry point given the complexities of what's happening in Ukraine. And also it reflects the reality anyway, that the UK is deeply committed to supporting Ukraine in the current conflict. And I think that also gives us a strength, because for those of you who work in Europe, you'll be aware that the idea that the UK is very popular there is perhaps we do need to work on those relationships. And if you do watch politics, you would be aware that Nick Thomas-Symonds, who's one of Keir Starmer's favourite MPs, he has been given the role of deepening our relationship with current leaders in Europe and is in European capitals regularly to talk about what matters to them so that we can understand how we can hit the ground running if we are fortunate enough to be successful in the upcoming general election. Now, how does the Asia Pacific fit into that? Well, we know, for example, with our relationship with Japan, that they were very concerned about the departure of the UK from the European Union, and a number of other countries seek to see the UK as part of Europe. So that's, I guess, helping to translate our position in terms of the future. And I know certainly from a China point of view, where I visited last month, working with countries like Germany that have a very big footprint in China and so on, that does make sense from an Asia-Pacific point of view. Now, very briefly, we know that there's a US election coming up as well, and David Lammy, having been at Harvard and being friendly with Barack Obama and knowing the Democrat scene there quite well, has built up relationships there over a long period. So, of course, the US is also a very important partner, always has been, always will be. And, of course, the current conflict in the Middle East, working very closely with Anthony Blinken and others there. Should there be a change in November, we will obviously respect the will of the American people and seek to build bridges and work there, depending on what happens, what the outcome of that election is. Just briefly also to mention, some of you who, as you mentioned, my Aussie accent, know I'm not an extra from Neighbours, but I obviously keep in touch with the Australian Labor Party, and there you would have noticed Penny Wong, who's the Foreign Secretary, as soon as she was elected, straight out to the Pacific, developing relationships in the region. And we very much see the Friends in Africa and African nations as being part of that picture. As a young continent and as a continent with massive potential, we want to renew a proper Africa strategy, which we feel has been lacking over the years. And that's also something which David feels very strongly about, renewing that concept of the Commonwealth, depending on how that unfolds after CHOGM, Commonwealth Heads of Government this autumn. So, you know, we have a lot of ambitions, but in foreign policy, as we know, it is events, dear boy. So we will be also trying to calibrate what we want to do with what the reality is when we get in, which is why David's called his essay The Case for Progressive Realism, because I think having lofty ideals before you get in, you have to be very careful that you don't set up too many things that you want to achieve and then you get frustrated. So we're trying to be as involved as possible now so that people can tell what it would be like if we were fortunate enough to secure the support and the confidence of the British people.
That was a very wide-ranging and interesting answer. So a year of elections. Elections happen all the time. Some of those elections feel a little more uncertain than others of those elections. If you stand back and reflect on the UK's position in the world these days and how that plays through into diplomacy, are there any patterns you can see emerging from all the elections going on, the changes going on?
Well, I think that feeling of uncertainty is very real. And also I feel that the national security piece is much more prominent than perhaps it was 5-10 years ago. I think 5-10 years ago it was all about prosperity and, you know, the international aid budget and so on. And I think now, you know, we do have to give due regard to the conflicts that are going on. And of course the resources question, because the Russia piece, the Middle East, we're going to be getting worried about resources, and I'm sure all of you in this room are looking very much at the oil price and so on, and that challenge that we've got on climate change. How do we manage all of those balls in the air when there's a lot of countries that are just very, very upset with their neighbours and don't want to be strategic or look at those big questions. So I think we've got a lot of work to do, both in securing our own national security and being confident that we can play that leadership role, particularly in Europe and around that shifting piece on NATO, should that happen in the autumn. But I think we've also got to challenge within the international fora that the long-term future of the planet is very, very important, and we do have to push back a little bit that everything can be resolved through more wars. So I think we would need colleagues in this room also to be making that case when they're in boardrooms, when they're speaking to leaders, that we have to keep that concept that, you know, we need to be focused on prosperity, bringing everybody up, if you like to use a government term, levelling up, not just investing more and more in those conflicts, which can be very draining on everybody. So we need to be hopeful as well and show the way. And that's why we've been working very carefully to try and promote relationships in the Middle East that looks towards a future, not just getting too stuck into those very entrenched conflicts.
Yeah, very clear. Can we switch to China?
Yes.
You mentioned you've just been over there. You have an insight because culture and language always go together to a degree. You have an insight which I certainly don't have, and I suspect many in this room don't have. How do you see that very critical relationship evolving? It's a fundamental relationship for financial services. The UK is, by reference to other countries, overweight to China. There's a lot of noise going on. How do you see your way through all that?
Well, I think we try to balance what we call the 3 Cs, so cooperating where we can around climate change, health economics, and just cooperating at a sort of cultural level to deepen our understanding of China. We want to promote our values, of course, and as a founding member of the Hong Kong Watch, I've worked across party since I've been elected in 2015 to promote fairness, freedom of the press. I've been working very hard with the family of Jimmy Lai to talk about Apple Daily, which is his newspaper and publication. He's currently in prison in China, and I've been very clear that I wanted to raise that when I went to China. And I did that, and I think that was well respected because we have to stand up for who we are as well and what our values are. And then, of course, we also need to challenge a bit as well. In a recent conversation about resources, mining, and Africa, the briefing that I had read that there was only one Chinese company that was bidding for a particular mine in Africa, and I thought, well, why isn't somebody from the City of London doing that? We do have to also, we can't leave the pitch and then complain that China's there. So I think we've got to be thoughtful about the way that we promote ourselves and the way that we can perhaps challenge in certain sectors, and how the UK government can support sectors to be challenging. So there are sort of 3 Cs. Cooperating is based on that multilateral concept. So we're obviously following the US's lead around the visit between Xi Jinping and President Biden in San Francisco in recent months, and then the tears down from that. And having been now as the first shadow minister under Keir Starmer to go to China, David Lammy's planning a trip there. Of course, we don't know if he can go in the summer yet because we don't know if there's going to be a general election. But if there's not a general election in the summer, he will try and visit, having had a very successful trip with the Great Britain China Centre, which some of you may well have met individuals from the Business Council as well, who hosted an excellent event in Beijing when we were there, meeting different companies who are active there.
I would love to spend a long time on that, maybe on another occasion. But I'm also watching a clock which seems to tick down with monotonous regularity, and we're getting really quite tight. So probably the easiest topic, in some ways, maybe not, is growth is clearly at the heart of the broader agenda. That's how the economy moves forward. Just looking quite narrowly at Asia Pacific,
Yes.
How do you see trade with Asia Pacific playing into that broader growth strategy?
Well, bearing in mind that our economy is 80% services, and we would like that to be different. We would like to have more of a mixed economy, but given that we will inherit that sort of preponderance in services, we do need to be realistic about supporting current business in the Asia Pacific, and obviously not just China. Japan has a lot of interests, having visited there twice, meeting different companies and so on. And those are companies which have been able to diversify as well across Southeast Asia. There's a lot of work there to do to support companies, to support new areas of growth. I mean, Vietnam, we've got the Vietnamese group coming into Parliament next week where I'm speaking to talk about things that aren't just Scotch whisky. There are other things that we managed to do there, and I do feel that it's a real growth area. I haven't mentioned India yet because obviously I know that you had the Secretary of State this morning, and I'm sure she filled you in on when the trade deal with India will be signed off. It was meant
You're going to tell me?
It was meant to be the Diwali before last, and we're a bit behind time on that. But obviously there is a lot of work there to be done with those great, young, vibrant country, and with a different hat on, chairing the all-party group for malaria, neglected tropical diseases. It was very exciting to see post-COVID how the Serum Institute and the manufacturing strength was able to do a sort of triangle with the UK businesses, but getting manufacturing going in some of the African countries. So this sort of perfect triangle of the research and development strengths which we have in science in the UK, working with India, working with African countries and creating growth. But Keir and David are both very keen to promote growth as a concept and also to promote green growth. So obviously in the other part of my brief, which is Pakistan, Afghanistan, that kind of area, very affected by climate change, what are the financial tools that we could use to try and create possibilities there? The loss and damage debate is slightly in abeyance because we're in between COPs, but it will come back. And we do need to find a way of making that work and having those discussions and dialogues and really being providing the financial instruments, but also providing some of that research and development expertise that goes alongside that.
Thank you very much. As you know, one of the specialisms we have within the International Trade Group is some very deep thinking about how you make both inward investment policy and trade policy work in the services context, and we were really delighted to work with you on that as we go on.
Good.
So can I ask everyone to thank Catherine for an absolute masterclass, and thank you for the job you do.
Great.